What I'm working on is I'm going to remove the steering wheel from my 1996 Ford Aerostar. And I've already disconnected both battery cables, and I let it sit for 10 minutes to let the airbag's backup supply discharge. In addition to that, I already have my ignition switch pulled out because I've been having to manually start it. But behind that you can see that yellow cable, and that yellow cable needs to be disconnected because that's the airbag backup or power line. So before you pull the airbag out of the steering wheel, you want to actually disconnect that cable. Alright, so after disconnecting the battery, let it sit for 10 minutes, and then disconnecting the airbag backup power supply, there are 4 bolts, metric 10 millimeters, which you need a deep socket for. There's 2, and then there's 2 more on the other side that you need to remove. And then after you remove those, look like that, you can actually pull this out. And there's your airbag. You'll need to disconnect this yellow airbag connector. And then your airbag can be taken out. Alright, so after you remove the airbag, make sure that when you carry it with the front of the airbag facing away from you and set it somewhere safe, and with the airbag facing up, just in case of any issues. In addition to having disconnected the airbag, you also need to disconnect this cable so that you can actually, when you pull the steering wheel off, that wire can go through. Alright, so I'm using a T50 torque bit socket, and I have that on a 6/6 extender, and I'm using my ratchet wrench. Now this is going to be a little bit tight to get off. Not all things are replacement ones I got, because when you actually remove the retaining bolt for your steering wheel, you're supposed to actually replace that. You're not supposed to put the same one back on. I had to buy a pack of 4 for about $15 from my local Ford dealer. And just note, it's going to be a little tricky to get that first pull. Once you get that, it starts coming off pretty easily. Alright, I have the retaining bolt out. It's going to be a little harder to see, but there's a little yellow dot here, and it's lined up with the steering wheel. There's a line there. You might not necessarily have a yellow dot there, so you might want to use just like a Sharpie or something to make a mark, to make sure that you have an alignment between your steering wheel and the steering, between those 2 points, so that when you put it back together, you have it aligned correctly. Alright, so I marked my alignment, and I put on the steering wheel puller. Those 2 holes that you can see, you find the ones in your puller kit that fit, and you thread those into there. Then you have the soft end of this black bar pushed down against that hole where you had it marked alignment, and then you have these nice and tight, so when you crank this, it'll pull the steering wheel. Alright, so after tightening the 2 silver ones, I cranked clockwise on the center one, and the steering wheel just comes right off. Make sure you feed the wires through. Alright, with the keys in the on position, there's a little spot, little hole that you can stick something metal, like a pin or a punch or something, into there. You just hold that in there, and then you can just pull this right out. And then you have that nice and empty. And after you do that, you can unclip this, which mine, a little piece of it broke off, but still works fine. Alright, so there's tabs on the back that allow you to pull that straight off. See, there's only 3. Located here, here, and here, that attach onto that, which gives you access to the next point, which is taking this turn signal off, which is pretty easy. All there is a screw here and one right there, and then you can, some people leave the wire harnesses in, you can take them out too. They're, I don't know, it makes them more accessible if you take them out. Alright, so the next step, I've removed the turn signal and using a Phillips, got the two connections off. Now we're going to remove the turn signal cam right here. And again, the Phillips is one of the most useful things here. You just stick it, you lightly push down so that leaves a little bit of that spring, and it'll make the turn cam come up. And when you get it, it'll just come right off. Well, it's a little tricky at first, and it feels like it. The key is to actually put a little pressure on the spring, not push it forward, but to put pressure off of it on the spring so it can come off. That's just a piece of plastic. You need to remember how it went on, because one side's different than the other, and that's how you got to put it back on. Alright, this next step requires ring pliers, because you need to actually, without it, well, you don't even want to try. You just gotta squeeze it and pull that off. And without it, it's, I tried, you can't do it. You can buy them for about $10. This one was about $18 for mine. And believe me, it's something you want to have on hand. So after you get the snap ring off with the ring pullers, you can take out the spring guide, and the bearing retainer, so that area is all nice and clear now. Next, we're going to carefully remove the tilt spring. I used a screwdriver and just managed to plop it out carefully, but definitely use caution. If you have this, you're supposed to remove another little spring as well before, otherwise you could break something when you try and lower the column. Alright, so from inside the lock cylinder, you're going to pull out this green thing. I use pliers, it just snaps out. Then on the pliers, you're going to rotate this so it comes out. And then this just lifts right out. And that all comes from out inside of here. Alright, now to access this, so I could actually get that loose and take it off, there's one of these on each side. I removed both of those. And then further up, you can see in here, I had to remove this to access it. I loosened both of these. There's one on each side. I loosened them, not completely taking them off, which gave me enough play to lower this to actually get those off. Alright, so if I did this right, I should be able to pull back on this and take this off. Alright, now looking at the part I just pulled out, you can see that on my replacement actuator to go in there, I have a pin on there, whereas I don't have a pin. So I'm actually need to go in there and find that broken pin so I can actually replace this. Alright, just by fishing in there, I managed to pull that old pin out. Kind of hard to see on this video though. And that I don't actually need anymore. But it also gives you an idea of where the pin needs to go when you put the new one in. Alright, so I got my actuator in there. As you can see that. It now has the pin inside. To get that in there though, without actually taking the whole housing off, you have to file it down so that when you stick it in there at an angle, it'll actually fit so you can get the pin locked in there. But now that I have that done, it's actually in. Now I'm going to grease that area up before I move on. Alright, so I fed this on a little bit. But for the next step, I'm going to have to manually pull these two out of the way so I can begin seating this on back how it was. But you have to make sure these are pulled out of the way so you can actually get it seated and make sure it makes a good seat before you actually attach it, or you could cause some damage. Alright, so what I did was to get those down for when I do reattach my housing, right here, is I put the two of the airbag screws to help hold those down. As you can see, I got my bolts started. I got it actually aligned. I still got bolts down here holding down those clamps so they're out of the way, so I'll have to get that out of the way, but I'm going to get the bolts in first. So I had a lot of difficulty getting these this spot right here especially aligned, and to fix that I had to stick a flat screwdriver in and manually push the part inside of there slightly over so that it could actually seat correctly. It's a little tricky, but once you get it, it'll actually line up correctly. And the reason why it won't line up correctly is if this thing needs to be pushed over from inside the actual shaft. Alright, I've got my bolts nicely tightened on both sides. So before I take those two bolts out, I'm actually going to reattach these two. And I'm going to make sure the two in the back are reattached so this goes all the way back up again. Another issue I had when I was trying to get the bolts, this part aligned, was the two front ones popped out of the thing and got off alignment, which also helped take a little bit longer. So make sure it stays inside that track so it can go up and down. Otherwise you might have a little bit of alignment issues with this part. Alright, so I've got the housing back so it's nice and strong. And then I just use a screwdriver in here and the needle and those pliers to just push it out, and it fell on the floor. So make sure you don't hopefully lose one of your airbag bolts. And then we're ready to move on to the next step. Alright, now I'm going to reassemble right here. Nope, that's not the snap ring, that's the bearing retainer. That just goes all the way down. You get that down, followed by that little guy, followed by the spring, and then finally the snap ring is going to go on, and then the cancel cam. Now backing up a step, this PVC pipe is where it comes in handy. I just use that and I just, even just a slight push that one piece right back into, first one right back into place. So that's all the way down. Alright, on this next one, make sure you put that in correctly. Kind of looks like a top hat, and you want the top of the hat to be facing out. And then you can attach your spring. And then the snap ring. Now the snap ring is where you're going to use the PVC pipe again to push that on. Alright, so what I got set up here is some PVC pipe, custom length with the washer and one of my pieces from my steering wheel kit. And what I do is have that locked in, and then I'm just going to tighten it to push the snap ring to put pressure on the spring so it all goes back into place. It's not the best setup, but you should definitely get a lot of PVC pipes so you can get a custom length for whatever it is you have to actually push that in. Then your cancel cam just slides right back into place. Make sure you put it so that it goes in correctly.